say mbyrne is the GIO of the FCC. He looks like my younger brother, but he's not. Although it's possible that one of us was lifted from a crib for props. So please give a warm welcome to mbyrne.
We have a saying at the FCC that we've been going through lately. We don't do paper maps. And while to a lot of this audience that probably is a no-brainer, but in the federal government, this is maybe a new thing, right? And we actually say it constantly. Someone comes to us and says, hey, do this for us, that's great, we're not going to give you paper. And they go, oh, kind of scratch their head. This has been brewing for some time with us. About a year and a half ago, I happened to go to a meeting in this building. Actually, it was across the street. It wasn't really in that building. It's in the complex with this guy, who happened to be the chief technology officer for the federal government at the time. It was a classic federal government briefing. Staffer A was standing there with briefing packets, folders filled with 15, 20 pages. And on about 10 of those pages were 8.5 by 11 leaflet paper, entire CONUS US maps of bad cartography. And Mr. Chopra came in a little late, took Staffer B's briefing, flipped through the pages in about 8 seconds, and then spent the next 45 minutes on his iPhone. Fortunately, he happened to be sitting next to me. And at the end of that meeting, he turned to me in a soft voice and said, now when you make the national broadband map, you're not going to give me this, are you? Pointing those pages. And I quietly said no. So, right, this is kind of a significant shift. People don't want to see paper. They want interactive data. So I decided, given those two principles, to title this talk, I Believe in URLs. It seems like a simple concept, right? These things have been around for a long time. They're really important, and we take them for granted. It's actually an acronym, right? U stands for uniform, as it works for everything. Anyone can use it. R is a resource. It provides benefit to us. L, locator. It's a location. It's an address. It's a place. If you look up the Wikipedia location for URL and read the history, Tim Berners-Lee developed this protocol. He did it in 1994. And quite honestly, it hasn't changed in 20 years. It's been about the same thing. This fascinates me. That we, in an industry governed by Moore's Law, that stuff moves at a crazy pace, that we're going to conferences and reading technology mags and reading industry articles that say, new, you gotta get this is brand new, this is coming out next week, you gotta get this one. I have to keep up, we got this great new feature. This is gonna increase your productivity, this is gonna be great. And yet, if I go to my CIO every time I see one of those things, and I say I need that, my budget goes up exponentially. Not linearly, exponentially. And all of this stuff is still based on the same protocol, the URL, that's 20 years old. Because it's uniform, it works, it's simple. In my job, I have two primary goals, two primary functions. Function one, ensure that the policy team has data that they can visualize prior to the policy decision that helps them understand the outcomes. It's a map. It's a number. It's a whole bunch of information that allows them to go, oh, wait a minute, maybe that's not the best decision for us. Goal number two, after they make that decision, make sure it's transparent to the public. We do that in these URLs, fcc.gov/maps/developer and /data. There's a couple others, /blog, /events. It's all URL based. The data's there. You can build off of the data there. You can read about the decision there. With these principles in mind, I thought it important to talk about 10 or so memes of ideas around the URL that we're investigating at FCC. Meme number one, uniform means uniform. It means there's zero barrier to use. As soon as I give someone a URL, they shouldn't have a wizard. Just 3 more clicks and you're there. Go through these steps. Accept this terms of service. I give them a URL, it's the data. To illustrate the point, I got this top email from this guy, Michael. Let's just say Michael is really important. Michael sends me a note, says, hey, do we have good data from these guys? JG is meeting them this morning. Let's say that JG is super important to us. I respond, sorry, I just got this, because I didn't respond in 1 minute. It was about a half hour later. I don't like to make Michael wait 30 minutes for a response. My response is 2 lines. Does this work for you? Here's a URL. broadbandmap.gov/provider/the provider's name /nationwide. Michael opens that URL and sees this data. Every statistic he could possibly want on that company. He has done 1 click to get to that information. It took me 3 clicks. I shouldn't be passing on something to someone who's much more important than me that takes them more clicks. There is zero barrier. It's uniform. Meme number 2, if you don't own the URL, you don't own the squat. Seems trivial enough. To illustrate the point, when I was writing the speech, I used Google Docs. Lots of people use this. Here's the URL for the document I was editing, which is fine, right? It's a cool little interface. I know how to get back to that document. I can come through that interface, my login. But imagine in our official work that we have to publish a document, a public notice, that someone needs to find later, comment on, rebuke, say that's the right thing to do, FCC, you failed here, you need to do something else. And that was the URL. It's not going to happen. The corollary to this meme is that you need to publish your URLs in English. They have to be searchable. They have to mean something in the URL. As an example, let's look at the broadband map URLs. You want to find developer resources, it's @/developer. You want to read about the broadband map, it's @/about. You want to read our blog, it's @/blog. You want the summary information for the state of California, it's @/summarize/state/ca /RI for Rhode Island /MA for Massachusetts. You want the summarized information for the county of Marin in California, it's state, California, county, Marin. And that page looks like this. Fully invested data. We continue this in our developer API URLs. So that same page that you just saw is populated by this API call, /summary/population/count this individual FID, which happens to be the county FIPS code for Marin County, California. It's an English URL. Number 3, know the resource you have. The corollary here is you can publish 100% of the data. It used to be that we had limits, that there was limits of computing, so we had big data sets that we didn't want to publish everything because of, it was too much memory or something. In fact, my first job at the Department of Fish and Game in California, we worked on this massive database in the early 90s, this huge Oracle installation that was 28,000 records, right? Insurmountable kinds of efforts to get to every record. You can publish every record because A, you can, the marginal cost of doing it is negligible, and B, someone will use it. So we published this API about 18 months ago. It's a lookup for every census block in the US. Right? You pass it a lat long, it gives you the block. In this case, a very special place to me, located in Newport, Rhode Island. And it does this in, what's the return here? 5 milliseconds. Right? 11 million blocks, return 5 million seconds. For every block in the US, I can publish every record. We took the same tack for broadband map. We publish every record in that data set based on every broadband provider. That data set's 25 million records. Response time here, 11 milliseconds. You can publish every record. Do it. Meme number 4, unintended consequences are good. In our role at the FCC, we regulate the communications industry. We have focused efforts around spectrum management, focused efforts around every media outlet, focused efforts around public service or public safety. We tend to think our data is only used for that very thin slice. Lots of federal entities do this. However, as soon as we begin to open up that data, there are other uses. Those other uses are good. We should not prohibit those other uses. The example I'd like to illustrate here is when we built Broadband Map, we had a zero barrier to API usage. There's no API keys, none whatsoever. And we kind of struggled after doing that. We thought that was a great idea, but we struggled after doing it. Well, how do we know people are using them? So we need to figure out some API management system. So we restructured all of our APIs to have the second to last line be an asynchronous write from MongoDB, where we write the entire API call, including the location that was queried, not the location from where it came. And we built this little app that allows us to visualize those calls in real time. And by we, I mean Juan. Where's Juan? So we can fire this up, turn it on, and we see the last 100 points live as they're being queried, right? This is kind of cool. And you see distributions like this. And the week after we turned it on, we saw distributions like this. We're like, hey. And 10 minutes later, it was Arkansas. So someone was crawling alphabetically. The following week, we saw a distribution like this. Someone was crawling latitudinally. Well, that's super cool, right? That's an unintended consequence. We didn't know that someone would do this, but they are, because they can. So we started to look at the stats. I think the really important one is bullet number 2. If the web page is used only as the application interface, the wireline and the wireless search call should be a 1-to-1 ratio. We see a 9-to-1 usage on that API. That's cool. I don't know what they're doing. It's an unintended consequence. It's good. We think that the ratio of usage to from API to the web page is about 4-to-1. That's a good thing. Meme number 5, think about geography first. Not a big selling point for this crowd. However, we met with another large entity that most everyone knows. They had terabytes and terabytes of data. And they said, you guys are doing cool stuff. Can we play with you? And we're like, yeah, that's great. Let's do something cool. And they came back to us and they showed us their stuff. And we started talking to them. And we realized that their terabytes and terabytes of data were not locationally aware. And we're like, we can't play with you. Go make your data locationally aware. And they just kind of scratch their heads and the sort of thing dissolved. But the corollary I kind of want to talk about here is spatial data is not special. It's a column in a database, right? So here's just tracked data. This is just census blocks in Postgres. The right-hand side is just the geometry column. We need to expose that, understand the spatial relationships, understand what point and poly means, what poly means, what a line intersect means, what the Venn diagram teaches us about all of that data, so that we can actually use it. When we did this with Broadband Map, it allowed us to make a mobile application with fairly minimal effort. I can turn on a smartphone, hit Broadband Map, and it shows me the 25 closest community anchor institutions to the point that you're at because we thought of geography first. We built geography into the data collection. Meme number 6, the domain is the World Wide Web. The corollary is it's worldwide. I don't need a platform on top of anything. Someone trying to sell me a platform is selling me something. It's worldwide. So to illustrate the point, we have the FCC took data from the National Broadband Map. We created this tile set. This tile set is the maximum advertised speed at every census block. We dissolved it into 7 or 8 categories, and we published it as a blank tile set. And we published the endpoint of the URL. Because of that, the Department of Education took that tile set, overlaid every school on it, and made their own application showing broadband availability at every school. This is at departmentofed.gov/data. There's no platform. We published a URL endpoint. They used it. They made an application. And they made the application look different. This is where my kids go to school. Go see Barnsley. And the map is different, right? They can mash it up and do different things because we just published an endpoint. Meme number 7, the enterprise is any device. Because of this, we need to we need to rethink what enterprise means. The World Wide Web is an ecology. People connect to it with different devices. We no longer need to think about the enterprise as being that single solitary database, that single solitary network. I'm going to connect to it from multiple devices. To illustrate the point, before last July, we didn't really have a /maps at fcc.gov. We had something that was called /maps that we didn't like. So we had some downtime when we started messing around with things, and we said, well, we should make a /maps because that would be important. We went to our CIO and we said, we need 2 Macs. 2 MacBook Pros, that's kind of a big investment, right? Cost us about $4,000. And we started messing around like everyone at the time with Mapbox. We said, this is a really cool thing. We think we can make something enterprise-y out of it. We got our redevelopment team involved and we said, hey, can you code something that maybe automatically populates a page off of our Mapbox account? And they said, sure. And we started publishing some maps. And that became /maps. The total investment of that project was less than $10,000. Less than $10,000 in governments makes people scratch their head. How did you make something enterprise for less than $10,000? Well, because we just went through the process. This is one of the key maps that was developed there. The thing I want to illustrate here is there needs to be a low barrier to publish and a low barrier to consume. Our low barrier to publish is we actually create these maps on MacBook Pros. I'm not doing this on a massive data infrastructure. I have data loaded on a MacBook Pro and I'm creating tile sets there. The low barrier to consume is it's a URL endpoint. These 3 people, the New York Times, GigaOM, and Discovery News, all republished that map. They didn't call me. They didn't have to install software. They took the URL endpoint and they republished it. Meme number 8, know your real estate. We see lots of maps like this. In fact, this is the first one. I think this is number 1 from /maps. And we make the real estate really big. Here's the whole map. Well, I will tell you in my job, 9 times out of 10, I'm publishing a number, not a map. So know your real estate. Know when publishing a number or suites of data that are geographic are more important than publishing a map that takes up 100% of the real estate. The map here is very small. Number 9, publish multiple instances. The marginal cost is negligible, almost 0, in fact. So the map that I showed previously, the black and white map, is a map that we're doing for a very big auction that's coming up in September. And that'll auction off Spectrum in a very unique way that we're doing. And we originally published that map as a fully baked tile set in Mapbox, and as part of an official public comment from the FCC. And when we did that, we initially got comments that said, that's great, give us all the data. Even though that we had published, along with that, the census blocks, the full list of all census blocks that were affected. So we turned it around, sure. Within about 2 weeks of receiving all those public comments, we pushed out a WMS, a shapefile, and a Mapbox tile set of just that data. So here they were. People gave us public comment. We said, all right, great. Let's give you the shapefile. We'll give you a WMS. We'll give you a tile set. Marginal cost of doing that was negligible. Took me an hour maybe to do those things. And someone did something really unique with it. The state of Kentucky, who wanted to comment on that, called their partner, the people who work with them to do all their geospatial, Baker, and they said, hey, give us a map of this so that we can really investigate what it's like. What's this data telling us? Baker said, well, let's do something novel. Rather than give them back a PDF, why don't I play with the tile set that FCC just produced as a tile set? And they did that, and they mashed up all of Kentucky's comments into that new map with our original tile set, creating 3 new colors that says you should include this block and not that block. And they submitted that back for the formal record. Now, unfortunately, they didn't submit back for the formal record the URL of the mashup, which I really want them to do. They just didn't have time. It's the first time I know of that a formal docket came back with mashed up live data. That's really important to us. Meme number 10. All credit goes to Shelby Johnson, the GIO for the state of Arkansas. Meme number 10 says, there will never be an issue that is wholly geospatial. The issue is public policy. It's education policy, it's healthcare policy, it's transportation policy, it's communications policy. We're just here to support. We're just here to offer tools to digest those policies. I call this the will paradigm. You will notice that that is likely the only thing that's capitalized in this presentation. I'll get to that in a minute. I happened to go to a meeting in this building. Again, it wasn't in this building, it was in a building across the street from this building. And it was this meeting. It was about 2.5 years ago. It was, that's the URL that is the official transcript. It's the Federal Geospatial Data Management legislative hearing before the Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources of the Committee of Natural Resources, U.S. House of Representatives. I was very excited to be invited to testify in front of this group with some really esteemed colleagues, July '09. And for 2 hours, we talked about what the National Spatial Data Infrastructure was in front of congressmen. And they asked us questions, and they said all these things. So what is this? Tell us about it. How do we make it? You know, the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. This seems like an important thing. And after 2 hours, the ranking member, Representative Costa, a Democrat from Fresno, says these 2 paragraphs. I'll read the second one because I think it's pretty important. I mean, in all your heads, we had this nice video and stuff, but what would a national spatial data infrastructure, can any of you describe it to me so that we can maybe some distinction of what's an appropriate role for the public sector and the role for the entrepreneur or private sector? So clearly we had failed, right? He's still struggling with what the concept is after 2 hours of us talking about it. And so we all went around and tried to answer his question. And I, again, official transcript, started with a stock bureaucratic answer. It has these 4 components, you see. It's IT and standards, and then I paused. And I said, that's the wrong answer. It's successful when my son, Will, who happened to be 7 at the time, sits in your place with a laptop, and he's able to live query all of this data to get the policy decision. That's when we have the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. That's only possible with a URL. I thought it appropriate to end with this conclusion. I'll give you a second to read it. Okay, I'll read the lessons. The passing of this threshold accelerated by allowing large existing databases to be linked together with new ones. Anyone recognize this? This guy wrote it in 1989 as part of his original proposal for the World Wide Web. It's entirely based on the idea that we have a URL. My name is mbyrne, and I believe in URLs.